When we look at the maps of the Middle East today, we see more than just tactical movements or the flashes of missile interceptions over Haifa and Tel Aviv. We are witnessing the breakdown of what intelligence veterans call strategic ambiguity. For decades, the shadow war between Iran and Israel was contained by unwritten rules of tit for tat that stopped just short of the abyss. But as the smoke rises from industrial hubs and the skies over the Mediterranean fill with drones, we have to ask, have we finally crossed the point of no return? The headlines scream of aluminum collapses and obliterated hubs, but the real story isn't just about the physical destruction of infrastructure in Bahrain or the effectiveness of the Iron Dome. The real story is the failure of traditional deterrence. We are seeing a shift from localized skirmishes to a high intensity, multi front saturation war that threatens to pull the world's superpowers into a vacuum of their own making. Today, we analyze this escalation not through the lens of evening news sound bites, but through a framework of deep state intelligence analysis. Why is this happening now? Who actually stands to gain from a regional conflagration? And most importantly, is there any off ramp left before the big one begins? To understand the gravity of this moment, we must look at it through a lens seasoned by decades of observing the machinery of war. Ray McGovern, during his 27-year career at the CIA, which included chaired briefings of the president's daily brief, has often emphasized that intelligence is frequently sidelined by policy. McGovern's analytical framework is built on a fundamental skepticism of the official story. He has long argued that the U.S. and its allies often miscalculate the resolve of their adversaries, assuming that technical superiority, like missile defense systems, is an absolute shield. In his view, the current crisis isn't a series of isolated terror attacks, but a calculated response to what Iran perceives as an existential threat to its regional axis of resistance. From the perspective of a veteran analyst, the saturation of Israeli airspace by the IRGC is a demonstration of a capability intended to send a message to Washington as much as to Jerusalem. McGovern has consistently pointed out that when diplomacy is replaced by maximum pressure, the result isn't a surrender, but a cornered opponent who feels they have nothing left to lose. The primary question being asked in Western capitals is can Israel's defenses hold? But McGovern's analysis suggests this is the wrong question. The real question is how long can a nation function under the psychological and economic weight of a perpetual barrage? McGovern has often referenced the concept of cost imposition. It costs tens of thousands of dollars to intercept a drone that may only cost a few hundred to build. When the IRGC or the Houthis launch dozens of targets simultaneously, they aren't just trying to hit a building, they are trying to bankrupt the defense logic of the state. His documented position on these matters is clear. Technology is never a permanent substitute for political settlement. If the Iron Dome or the Aero system has to split its attention, as recent reports suggest, the statistical probability of a catastrophic leaker, a missile that gets through, rises toward 100%. Recent reports regarding strikes on strategic hubs such as aluminum plants in Bahrain or port facilities in Haifa represent a significant shift in target selection. In McGovern's view, this is economic warfare by other means. Why target aluminum or shipping? Because these are the arteries of the global economy. By expanding the theater of operations to include the Gulf's industrial infrastructure, the IRGC is signaling that the global consequences aren't just a threat, they are the strategy. McGovern has frequently warned that the U.S. intelligence community often underestimates how much regional players are willing to sacrifice to disrupt the status quo. If the strategic aluminum hub is indeed in the crosshairs, The message is that no Western-aligned economic asset in the region is safe. We must address the why of this specific moment. McGovern's analysis has often focused on the mesomatic, the military industrial congress and intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex. He argues that there are powerful forces in Washington and Tel Aviv that view a direct conflict with Iran as an inevitable necessity. Conversely, he suggests that Iran's current saturation strategy is a desperate attempt to create a balance of terror to prevent a full-scale invasion of their mainland. But here is the danger: when both sides believe they are acting defensively, the escalation ladder has no top rung. If Haifa and Tel Aviv are under constant fire, the political pressure on the Israeli government to end the threat once and for all becomes irresistible. Does this lead to a wider war? McGovern has warned that the U.S. is often wagged by the dog, being pulled into conflicts by its proxies and allies rather than following its own national interests. Beyond the maps and the missile counts, there is a dimension often ignored by the armchair generals: the human and ecological cost. When an industrial hub, whether it's an aluminum plant or an oil refinery, is struck, the environmental damage isn't contained by borders. The chemical runoff, the atmospheric pollution, and the destruction of vital infrastructure create a toxic legacy that lasts for generations. McGovern's broader concern for peace is rooted in the belief that modern warfare has become too destructive for the planet to sustain. We aren't just talking about the tragic loss of life in the streets of Haifa or Tehran. We are talking about the ecological suicide of a region that is already facing water scarcity and climate instability. In his view, the civilizational cost of a regional war in the Middle East would be a global depression, a refugee crisis of unprecedented proportions, and the permanent scarring of the cradle of civilization. Is the pursuit of strategic dominance worth the price of a habitable world? As we look at the next 24 hours, we must look past the flashes of the missiles. The analysis provided by veterans like Ray McGovern reminds us that war is the ultimate failure of intelligence, not the collection of data, but the intelligence of the human mind to find a path toward coexistence. Israel may withstand the next wave and the one after that, but the question we should be asking isn't who wins the battle, but rather, what is left of the world once the battle is over? If we continue to view these events through the lens of a scoreboard, we miss the reality that in a regional war of this scale, everyone loses. We invite you to think deeply about the information you consume. Is it designed to inform you or to prepare you for a war you didn't choose? If this analysis made you think differently about the current escalation, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear a perspective beyond the headlines.